welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today our program is about Planned Parenthood in America, and we're very fortunate to have a person with us who is highly qualified to deal with this important subject. I welcome to the program Nancy Stone, who for almost 9 years now has been the executive director of the Spokane and Whitman County's Planned Parenthood program. Our guest has a BA degree in social work. She holds a master's degree in counseling. Her baccalaureate degree is from Eastern Washington University, and her master's is from Whitworth College. Nancy, we're very delighted to have you on the program, and we look forward to discussing this important subject.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm very pleased, as always, to have regular panelist Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in Idaho, and I shall ask Janelle to commence the questioning.
Nancy, to help us understand Planned Parenthood better, can you tell us exactly what is your organization?
Well, we're a private, nonprofit organization governed by a board of directors. We are an affiliate of our national organization, Planned Parenthood Federation of America. There are approximately 172 affiliates in this country now, and we have just under 900 clinics in this country that we provide services from.
And so how are you supported?
Well, through a variety of funds. We get some federal Title X funds. Those are public health service dollars, and they are money that each year is authorized by Congress. They're called family planning funds. And they go to clinics, to hospitals, to Planned Parenthoods, health departments, places like that, who provide family planning services to poor and low-income women. We then have some state monies. In Washington State, they're called state-funded services monies that pay for some services, some family planning services, as well as for some surgical services. We also are authorized to accept Title XIX medical coupons, and those pay for family planning services too. Then we are not a free clinic. We are on a sliding fee scale with the parameters established by our Title X grant. So many of our patients are totally subsidized. A very few pay full fee for their services, but the majority of them pay a small amount based on the sliding fee scale, the numbers of people in their family, and their income. Then, in addition to that, we have a very active private fundraising. Our board of directors work very hard to raise private funds for us in the community because our grant monies, our public monies, we are prohibited from using those funds for public affairs activities, advocacy efforts, for fundraising to raise money, and of course for any abortion services.
And how old is Planned Parenthood? It seems to me like it's almost adult age now.
Well, I think just about. Our national organization is celebrating its 75th anniversary this year. And the local Planned Parenthood of Spokane and Whitman counties will be celebrating our 20th anniversary this year.
So you've been in the business a while.
We really have. Larger cities have had Planned Parenthoods for 50, 60, 70 years.
Can you tell us a little bit about what services you offer then?
Well, we began offering educational services and contraceptive services. And as time goes on, we've seen our services increase. We now offer a lot of sexually transmitted disease diagnosis and treatment for both men and women. A few years ago, we didn't do that. The health departments primarily did that sort of thing. But we're seeing patients with many STDs and many problems, so it's best that we're able to treat them right then and to treat their partners. And in addition to that, we're providing counseling for abortion services, for vasectomy and tubal sterilization procedures, and infertility referrals. But most recently, we began providing abortion services ourselves. Prior to last summer, we had referred those people to private physicians within the community.
And do you do counseling, genetic counseling as well?
We don't do genetic counseling. We refer to the genetic counseling office
but you do
there in Spokane.
Reproductive counseling?
Oh, yes. Because there are a number of birth control methods, and a lot of people will come in thinking they want one method, but they don't know enough about it. They need to have more information before they determine what is the best choice for them. Also, somewhat depends on their medical exam. Not all women can use an IUD, say. So once they learn the advantages, disadvantages, and risks, then they and the nurse practitioner are better able to make a final decision.
So can you tell us something about how many staff members do you have at your clinic?
Well, we've really grown. I think we have 43 now, full-time staff, and then we have some part-time. We saw something over 10,000 unduplicated patients last year in our 4 clinics.
I'd like to pursue a little bit further your
Okay.
services that Janelle has been talking with you about. You've identified those areas that you serve, and sometimes we get the impression that in Planned Parenthood that all your services are with women, and I know that's the really majority of your cases, but you also work with men in relation to transmitted diseases, and also do you work with couples, both the...
We do. We certainly encourage a couple to come in, especially if they're involved in counseling, either for birth control method or for an abortion. The reality is that that's a small percentage. A lot of males simply are unwilling, unable, or whatever to come in. But I think we're seeing those numbers increasing as time goes on, as the younger generation is seeing more and more a responsibility, a male responsibility in the area of reproduction. We also do see a number of families and male and female parents, both single and married, in our education program. While we believe very strongly with the more conservative element that sex education belongs at home, I certainly think it does, and that's where it should take place. But the reality is that it does not take place there, except in very, very small numbers, percentages. And a lot of parents are beginning to realize that they can avail themselves of some help in talking to their youngsters about sex, about reproduction, birth control methods, and those sorts of things. So they'll come in and talk with one of our educators and get some material and get some hints, and it kind of smooths the way for them.
So part of your responsibility is to assist parents in doing what many conservative people want, and that is education in the home.
Oh, absolutely. We also do a lot of work with churches.
Yes.
Are invited in to help the church prepare. Usually it's a series of programs with that particular church's values and those sorts of things, but using our educators and some of our resource material. There's one other program that we provide that almost no one else does in our area, and that is some sexuality education for the developmentally disabled. We have a woman on staff who's very skilled in that area and does a lot of work with the developmentally disabled population themselves, with their parents, and often with group home workers, things of that nature.
As you've indicated, even though there's some improvement in the area, it's still, I assume, a great majority of the families that do not have sex education at home with their children. And so therefore the school systems throughout the country have got involved with sex education too, and oftentimes have experts on board that can deal with it in a very professional and trained way that even maybe it's difficult to deal with it to that level of sophistication in the home. Do you work closely with school systems and sex education?
We do. Some districts more than others. For instance, in District 81, which is our largest school district in Spokane, we have been approved to provide, I think it's 4, maybe 5 different presentations. When I say approved, that means that our educators have given that same presentation to the Human Growth and Development Committee, and it has been approved. So we do that in those schools. In the Meade District, in the West Valley District, we're able to do almost anything that the teacher requests, any kind of education. We've seen a kind of a trend in the last few years. Instead of doing as much in the classroom, we're doing more with teachers themselves and school nurses and school counselors and parents and church people. When we're able to do that, we really have a multiplier effect for our community as a whole. Our educators can only go so far, and if we have them in the classroom all the time, that's all the students they reach. But if we're able to help teachers and those other professionals out there and parents, then there's a much greater effect.
Thank you. Janelle Burke.
I want to ask a historical question, really. How long have people been interested in their reproductive systems and how their families were going to be, how many children they were going to have, and this kind of thing? How long have people really been involved in those kinds of issues? And then how does our society today, how does this fit into our society today? Are we more aware of those things, less aware of those things? Are they problems that have always been with society?
You're asking a number of questions. As far as we know, as far as we can trace, people have been concerned about unwanted pregnancies, numbers of children, way back as far as we have any information whatsoever. I remember reading one story, or one historical fact, that women in the Middle East cultures would use peach pits and put them up into their vagina, thinking that perhaps they could prevent a pregnancy that way. And as you know, the first condoms were made out of intestines from animals and things like that. So methods to prevent an unwanted pregnancy have been around for a very, very long time. They became more and more sophisticated as time goes on, and we're all aware of infanticide. And that was a direct result in many cases of families having more children than they could afford to feed and clothe and house, those sorts of things. Talking about modern day, I think it's interesting to note that the United States has fewer methods of contraception than any other developed country in the world. You may have read about the Norplant contraceptive that has just been approved by the FDA, which lasts for 5 years. We were the 14th country to get approval for that. That means 13 other countries were using Norplant in their countries before it was available to us here. A few years ago, we had 9 pharmaceutical companies doing contraception research for different methods, more effective methods, less expensive methods, ones with less risks, things like that. We now have one pharmaceutical company in this country that is from two-sided, actually. The conservative element on one side and the other element, which would be that we're such a litigious society right now as far as lawsuits and things like that. Pharmaceutical companies are very, very concerned about those things.
Well, as people began to be able to control reproduction, what impact did that have on society, on what people wanted to do, on their families and so forth?
I think certainly we see, and a lot of that, as you mentioned earlier before the program, really has taken place since World War II. We will never really have an equal society unless women are able to control their reproductive lives, whether it is with contraception or not. And I think that's when we began to see women coming to the forefront more in politics, in the professions, in work as a whole. It was after the oral contraceptive, primarily.
I'd like to get into a rather controversial issue that has to do with your whole program. I know has its supporters as well as it has the opponents. How do you respond to the individual, and there are a number of individuals in society who oppose sex education in schools, and they oppose even organizations like Planned Parenthood being at all, and certainly oppose any government funds. They also oppose contraceptives, the use of contraceptives. They oppose abortion. And then when the child that comes into the world, in some cases, I don't want to generalize too much, but in some cases, some of those individuals will also oppose child care programs, nutrition programs, and so forth. How do you deal with that line of opposition that goes through that whole process of the reproductive process and what happens to families?
Well, I do try to deal with it rationally and sensitively, because I think anything else doesn't get us anywhere at all. I think for the most part, those are people who are frightened frightened at the changes that they're seeing all around them. We're a very complex society now, and they're more comfortable dealing with things on a level that they knew as they were raised. I think that they also are wanting to hang on to some control of their children and their children's lives as they grow up without realizing that they don't have control. They never had that control, but they don't know that. And so an organization such as ours, who will provide sex education to teens, who will provide contraceptives and things like that, it is very threatening to them. Very often when we will get a parent who is totally opposed to sex education in the schools, if we can get those parents into our agency, meet with our educators, look at our material, hear one of our presentations, they'll say, you know, I didn't realize that's what you did. I can agree with those things. You're not trying to instill any particular value in my child, and we're not. We're encouraging the people that we educate to talk openly with their parents and their family about these issues so that they know what their parents' values are. We all hope that our kids will espouse our values as they grow older, and they don't. They don't take all of our values into and internalize them, but they do take a fair number of them, but only if we share those with them.
You've partially answered the question, but I was going to ask you to respond to the person that says to your organization or says to school systems the fact that you teach sex education or you provide contraceptive information and devices and so forth to individuals, that you're actually encouraging young people to be real sexually active.
Yeah, we do hear that a lot. The fact of the matter is, we know that young people who have received some good sex education tend to delay the onset of sexual activity somewhat. Not by large periods of time, but somewhat.
Are you saying that they tend to delay it more than those that have no information?
Yes, yes. And your second question has to do with encouraging them. There's just no information to back that up. Probably 98% of all the patients we see at our clinics have been sexually active 6 months to a year before they come in. They often will come in because they're fearful that they are pregnant right then, or a girlfriend has gotten pregnant, or a sister, or something like that, or they have an STD. Very often on a new initial examination of a patient, we will discover that they have an STD. So we are not and those figures, by the way, are pretty similar nationwide. The reality is we are not seeing enough teenagers. 60% of all of our patients are age 20 and older. We should be seeing them younger, especially if they're sexually active.
One final question, that is,
or planning on it.
One thing that's very puzzling as you deal with your field, individuals who do not want young people or even young adults to have certain information, and we have had an increase in venereal diseases in this country. How does one deal with trying to convince other people that without information you increase the chances of the spread of such diseases?
I'm not sure how to convince them. I've been trying that for a long time. It's a little like you don't want your teenager to drink. You certainly don't want them to drink and drive. But we do provide our teens with a lot of information about alcohol and drugs. We certainly give them lessons in driving. So it seems to me ridiculous that we not give them information about their bodies and their sexuality and those sorts of things, especially in this day and age of STDs, which certainly includes AIDS. We all know that teenagers think they're invulnerable. You know, it's not going to happen to me. Nothing's going to happen to me.
Thank you. Janelle Burke.
I want to follow up on two problems that I think society is recognizing right now. The first is teen pregnancy, and the second one is the sexually transmitted diseases. Can you speak to what are the numbers? Is it an epidemic here as well as in other places, or is that just something that happens in the big cities elsewhere? Where is it happening, and what kinds of figures do you have?
As far as the teen pregnancy, it is not changing a great deal in our area. Now, I don't know what it is here in Coeur d'Alene or in Idaho. In Spokane and in Washington, it's been very stable. Still far too many.
When you're talking about stable, over what kind of a period of time?
Several years.
Okay.
Several years. We have a number of clinics in the state of Washington, too, that provide family planning services. A great many of them, as a matter of fact. I think there's about 50-some all told, just within the state. The thing that really is becoming epidemic proportions is the sexually transmitted diseases. Okay. Because many of the diseases that a young woman or a woman of any age, a female, will experience do not have symptoms until they become very serious. Chlamydia is one that can cause sterility. The symptoms in the partners often will present themselves earlier than they will in females. The other thing is we have our young people mature earlier and they marry much later. So we have many more years in there where they are apt to have several partners. And those things really increase the risks of any sexually transmitted disease. I think one of the phrases that they've used a lot in AIDS education is especially telling, and that's the one that when you sleep with a partner, you are also sleeping with all the other partners that partner has had. So it's terribly important that we be very candid and very open with our young people in sexuality education. We can't play games and give them just bits and pieces of the information.
And then when we're talking about this, we're talking about both homosexual and heterosexual activities.
Yes.
And we're also talking about diseases that can often be treated. Is that correct?
Oh yes, oh yes.
And you do that kind of treatment at your clinic?
We do. We do a lot of, one of the things that sets Planned Parenthood aside from perhaps a physician is because we have some of those public monies, we're able to do more in education. So every single patient that comes into our clinic sees a nurse practitioner. We have specially trained nurse practitioners who provide the service and do the examinations, and receives information about her risk factors as far as sexually transmitted diseases goes, things like that, in the hopes that that individual will learn more about herself and her activities and be more careful, reduce her risk factors.
We want to move into the question of abortion, which has become a political issue in almost every one of the states. After Roe v. Wade, for a while it was at least not before legislative bodies, and then with the Webster case, it's gone back in that arena. It was dealt with in Idaho last year. Utah has just dealt with it. And I know that you have brought forth in the state of Idaho Initiative 120, and I understand it had a total of 243,000 signatures, the largest number on any initiative, and it does deal with abortion, what you're doing in the state of Washington. I wish you'd inform our viewers, particularly those who are not in the state of Washington, all about what Initiative 120 is dealing with.
To give you just a little bit of history, to put it in context, Washington legalized abortion by a referendum vote of the people in November of 1970, which was 3 years before the Supreme Court decision. And part of that included certain things having to do with abortion. We had a parental consent. We had a spousal consent. It could only be done till 16 weeks. And there was a residency requirement. It could not be outside the state. Or you had to be a resident for 90 days, which took care of that. Then when Roe v. Wade was enacted, then Washington State abided by all of the restrictions and guidelines surrounding Roe v. Wade, of course. If something happened in this, first of all, if Roe v. Wade were overturned, we would go back to those 1970 laws, which again were the spousal, the parental consent, the residency requirements, and those sorts of things. We do not want to do that. And many states are finding themselves in this sort of a predicament, because when Roe v. Wade was passed, they did not go back and change any of their state laws. They just left them on the books. So we don't want to go back to those 1971s. So we got together, Planned Parenthood, with a number of other pro-choice groups in the state of Washington, and formed a coalition to do this initiative. This is an initiative to the legislature, and they're in the process of dealing or not dealing with it now. If they don't deal with it, it will go on our ballot in this fall.
But my understanding is that you're taking through this initiative and you're codifying all your laws in one.
We are currently codifying what is the current practice surrounding abortion procedures in the state of Washington.
Which is basically that
based
a woman
on
makes
Roe
the
v. Wade.
Roe v. Wade and the right of a woman to make that decision
With her physician
physician.
in the first trimester.
Right. I wish we could continue this program. I know that Janelle has a question she'd like to ask, but I just have the signal that time is up. And Nancy, on behalf of Janelle Burke and our staff, we thank you for being with us today. You are most articulate in presenting the issue of Planned Parenthood, and we are grateful that you came by.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
I would like to also thank Janelle Burke, as always, for her very articulate and informing and penetrating questions. And I would like to invite all of you to be with us again next week, when we will discuss at that time what we think is, again, another very significant issue of our times. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.